One punch. Blood spilled. The entire bar fell silent. No one stood up. No one said a word. An 86-year-old man collapsed to the floor. And 30 minutes later, 3 military vehicles suddenly appeared in the middle of a quiet town. No one knew what was happening until the door opened and the person who walked in stopped the room cold. Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. Wheelo, Colorado. It was a cold, dry Saturday afternoon. Low clouds drifted over the old brick rooftops lining the town's quiet main street. Inside Bristol Tavern, a small bar that had been around for nearly 40 years. Soft, yellow lights glowed over dark wooden tables. The gentle clink of glasses mixed with the faint hum of classic jazz and low, familiar conversations. The front door creaked open, and in stepped Mr. Walter Grady, age 80. His gray felt hat sat slightly tilted on his head, and a weathered khaki coat hung over his lean frame. His walk was slow but steady, the kind of steady earned from years of marching through tougher terrain in a Marine uniform. One of the servers gave him a respectful nod. A few regulars looked up, offering small waves or a kind smile. Everyone here knew him. Walter headed straight for his usual table by the window, the same one where, years ago, his late wife Irene had carved their initials into the wood with a forked tine. The mark was still there, faded but intact. Irene had passed away 6 years ago, but Walter still came here every weekend, not for the bourbon. For the memories. The kind no one can take from you. His usual drink was brought over without a word. He took a small sip, leaned gently back into his chair, and let his gaze drift out the window, where the breeze danced through the rows of pine trees. About 10 minutes later, something shifted in the air. The tavern's door opened again, louder this time, and in stomped 4 bikers. One was tall, another had a skull tattoo stretching across his shoulder. All of them wore black leather jackets, stitched with the emblem, Iron Vultures. The smell of cigarette smoke followed them in like an unwanted guest. They walked loudly, deliberately, like they wanted to be noticed. From behind the bar, Marcus, the owner, glanced over quickly, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. The group took over a table in the middle of the room. One of them, with a shaved head and steel rings on his fingers, shouted across the bar, "4 of your coldest IPAs, now! And don't take all day!" Tommy, the young waiter, no more than 22, made his way over with a tray of beers. Slender, cautious, his eyes flicked between the men as he carefully set down each glass. But as he placed the last one, his hand caught the edge of the tray, and one of the glasses tipped, spilling beer across the biker's black leather jacket. Foam splashed across his shoulder. The room went still. "What the hell is this?" the biker snapped, leaping to his feet. His voice cut through the tavern like a blade. I'm so sorry," Tommy stammered, pale, hands trembling. "I'll grab a towel right away." "I don't want your damn towel," the man barked, stepping closer, his fist clenched tight. "Let me teach you how to serve a drink the right way." And just then, Walter stood up. No one expected him to step forward. Walter didn't move fast, but he moved with purpose. His posture was upright, steady. His eyes locked onto the biker's face, not with anger, but with the calm intensity of a father who's seen a son make a serious mistake. "He already apologized," Walter said, his voice low but firm. "It was an accident, no need to scare a kid over a spilled beer." For a moment, the entire table of bikers fell quiet. Then one of them let out a short, mocking laugh. "Well, would you look at that? The old Marine wants to play teacher." The man with the steel rings stepped forward, closing the space between them until his chest was inches from Walter's nose. "You really think you can butt into this, old man?" Walter said nothing. He just stood there, tall, steady, unwavering. And then, the punch came fast. No warning. A heavy, cracking blow landed square across Walter's right cheek. The sound, blunt and solid, rang out like a hammer against wood. His body buckled, stumbling sideways into a table before collapsing to the floor. A glass shattered nearby, and then silence. Tommy froze, mouth open. Marcus, the bar owner who had been watching from behind the counter, slowly stepped back into the kitchen without a word. A few customers looked away, pretending not to have seen. No one moved. Walter braced himself against the ground, slowly sitting up. His hand came away bloody. Reaching into the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a worn handkerchief and gently dabbed at the blood on his lip. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even frown. Instead, he calmly took out his phone and dialed a number. A number he had known by heart for years, one he had never called, unless it truly mattered. The blood hadn't yet dried at the corner of his mouth when Walter Grady quietly settled back into his chair. His cheek was already starting to swell, but his eyes stayed steady, and deep inside them, something was moving. Not rage, but the steady focus of a man who had faced things far more dangerous than fists. Holding the phone to his ear, he spoke only one sentence. "Mike, it's Dad. There's something you should know. At Bristol, that was it." He hung up, slid the phone back into his coat and picked up his handkerchief once more, blotting carefully, almost methodically. No one said a word. The bikers laughed and nudged each other, like they'd proved a point, but Walter knew better. The ones who laugh loudest are usually the ones who understand the least. In another part of Colorado, over an hour's drive away, Colonel Michael Grady, Walter's only son, was in the middle of a planning meeting at Fort Carson. As the commander of the 95th Tactical Brigade, he was used to surprise calls. But that voice, that message, short as it was, something in his father's tone made his chest tighten. Walter wasn't the type to make phone calls. And he certainly didn't call in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, not while his son was reviewing a high-priority training plan. Michael left the briefing room without saying a word. He didn't have to. Anyone who had ever served under him understood. There are calls that don't need explanations, especially when they come from the man who once taught you what honor really means. Back in Pueblo, Walter remained exactly where he was. He didn't leave. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand an apology or compensation. Because he understood, some battles aren't won by force, they're won by choosing not to use it. He'd lived through war, where bullets don't ask questions and survival balances on split-second decisions. But he'd also witnessed something even more destructive than war, the collapse of character. When good people stay silent in the face of wrong because it's easier than speaking up, and this time Walter chose not to stay silent. A little over 30 minutes later, as the sun dipped lower behind the western ridge, a low rumble echoed down Pueblo's quiet main street. It started as a distant hum, then grew deeper, sharper. People walking along the sidewalk stopped and turned their heads. 3 camo-painted Humvees rolled in slowly, one behind the other, no flashing lights, no sirens, but their presence was enough to hush the whole block. Following behind them was a black SUV, no civilian plates. Locals began pulling out their phones. Scenes like this didn't happen in small towns like Pueblo, not unless something big had just been set in motion. The door to Bristol Tavern creaked open. A cold breeze slipped in ahead of a strange, sudden silence. The bikers exchanged glances. One smirked. Another leaned back in his chair, pretending not to care. None of them had any idea what was coming. The lead Humvee's door opened. Colonel Michael Grady stepped down. He wore full tactical dress, no weapons, but his every step carried the weight of memory, discipline, and purpose. 6 special operations soldiers followed him. No rifles. No need. Their eyes were sharp enough. Michael didn't stop at the door. He walked straight into the tavern, like a man who already knew exactly what needed to be done. The room held its breath. His eyes landed on his father, Walter still sitting at his usual corner table, bruised, blood dried at the corner of his mouth, but back straight, like a commanding officer waiting for the final report. Michael turned slowly and spoke, voice low and firm. "Who put their hands on Sergeant Walter Grady?" No one answered. The biker who'd thrown the punch looked down, inching backward. One of the soldiers stepped forward, pulled out a handheld projector, and lit up the tavern wall with footage from the security camera. From the spilled beer to the blow. Every second was crystal clear. Michael didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. He just stood there and said calmly, "That man isn't just my father. He's the reason I understand what honor means." For a moment, the whole room froze. No more chatter. No more smirking. Just one thing filled the air. The quiet presence of justice. Not through force, but through respect. No one dared breathe too loudly. The video continued to play against the tavern wall. The young server being yelled at, the old man stepping in, the punch thrown hard and fast. A painful reminder of the kind of moment that demands more than silence. The biker who'd hit Walter stepped back, eyes darting to the floor. He stammered, "I didn't know who he was." Michael Grady stepped closer. His voice dropped. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who he was." That sentence landed softly, but hit like a stone. Michael turned and looked around the room, eyes lowered everywhere. A regular whom Walter greeted every Saturday suddenly couldn't meet his gaze. The young woman behind the bar winced slightly when Michael's eyes passed over her. None of them had thrown a punch, but none of them had stepped in either. Michael didn't accuse anyone, didn't point fingers. He just stood there, in the center of their silence, and spoke. Honor doesn't live in rank or age. It lives in the moment we choose to stand up, even when no one asks us to. When an old man gets hit in front of a room full of people and no one reacts, the problem isn't just the punch, it's the silence that followed it. Then he turned to the bar's owner, Marcus, the man Walter had once helped when he was just a kid washing dishes. Now Marcus stood quietly in the kitchen doorway, unsure. Michael's voice softened. "You once said he felt like family to you, but when he needed you most, you stepped back. I'm not here to judge. Just ask yourself, if that had been your father, would you have stayed silent too?" Marcus swallowed hard, eyes wet. He nodded slowly, then walked out to the center of the room, apologized publicly, and began working with one of the soldiers to file a formal statement. The biker? He wasn't laughing anymore. Local police had arrived, and the security footage left no room for excuses. When the bikers were finally escorted out, and the crowd slowly thinned, Bristol Tavern returned to its usual quiet. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence you feel ashamed of. It was the kind that follows a shift. Something real, something right. Walter Grady remained in his seat by the window. The fading afternoon sun streamed through the glass, painting soft gold lines across his bruised face. He didn't flinch. His eyes shone with quiet pride. In front of him, his son, now a respected Army colonel, stood tall, then brought his hand up in a formal salute, right there in the same bar his father had once built, with his bare hands. After the salute, Michael sat down and said gently, "I'm sorry I got here late." Walter smiled, low and warm. "No, son, you got here exactly when honor needed to be defended. Not too soon, not too late." The following week, a new sign was installed above the tavern's door. Bristol Tavern, built by a soldier, protected by his legacy. Young Tommy kept his job behind the bar. But something had changed. This time, when he stepped out to serve a table, his shoulders weren't hunched. And every time Walter walked in, the entire tavern rose to greet him, not because he asked for it, but because they wanted to do what was right. The story spread across town. Veterans organizations picked it up across the state. Schools invited former service members to speak. Youth groups formed to support elderly veterans living alone. Something had shifted, not through laws, but through something deeper. A quiet awakening in people's hearts. And the most remarkable part, it all started with one man, choosing not to stay silent. At the age of 86. In today's noisy, distracted world, honor isn't found in medals or titles. It's found in how we respond to what's wrong, especially when no one else is willing to. Never underestimate the power of a small act. A voice raised, a quiet step forward, a word spoken at the right moment, because sometimes that's exactly when honor needs us most. If you believe the world needs more people who speak up at the right time, type the word honor. Tap the like button if this story meant something to you, and subscribe to NT Amazing Stories, where we share true and meaningful stories of kindness, courage, and quiet strength every week, because some values, no matter how old, are always worth telling again.